Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta. My name is Rika Safrina, and I will be serving as moderator for today's webinar entitled COVID-19 Impact on Energy Sector Development in Southeast Asia. So this webinar is conducted by ASEAN Centre for Energy and the Energy Foundation China to launch our latest report on this topic and to present the findings of the study by the authors directly. Not only that, we also invited other experts in the topic to share their perspectives and knowledge to us. Before we start, I would like to give brief outline for the next 1 hour. First, we will have 2 welcoming remarks from EFC and ACE, and then 3 presentations from our experts, followed by Q&A session. If you would like to ask a question to one of the speakers or express your views, please write down your question in the chat or Q&A functions, and we will try to address it during the discussion session. To begin with, I would like to invite Dr. Dong Yu, Research Fellow of the Energy Foundation China, to give his opening remarks. So Dr. Yu, the time is yours.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our public webinar. I'm Yu Dong with Energy Foundation China, where I'm a research fellow in charge of international climate affairs. It's my pleasure to be here today and to present this study that we have been doing. Good morning and good afternoon to Dr. Adia Abdullah and Dr. Madhuddin Abdullah and Dr. Andy Tirta. It's nice to see you all. So in this project, we wanted to look at the impacts after COVID of the energy investments in Southeast Asia and in relationship with the rest of the world. We feel that this is both a challenge and an opportunity today. The challenge, of course, is that we have a reduced fiscal space in many countries to work on long-term issues such as energy transition, energy access, climate change. However, we feel that this is also an opportunity because long-term investments in renewable energies, low-carbon solutions could not only allow to kickstart the economy in many places, but also provide a stable and strong basis for the future's economy, reduce our dependencies in foreign fossil fuel, increase energy security and economic growth, and create jobs locally. I won't say too much into the details. I think that we had a very good result in the study, and we at Energy Foundation China really look forward to continuing to collaborate with the ASEAN Centre for Energy and all the partners here today in future works. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu, for the remarks. Now I would like to invite Dr. Andy Tirta, the Manager of Energy Modeling and Policy Planning at ASEAN Centre for Energy, to give her opening remarks. To Dr. Andy, the time is yours.
Good afternoon from Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Thank you so much, Ms. Rika Safrina, for your moderating for these sessions. And good afternoon to all colleagues, especially Dr. Yu Dong from Energy Foundation China, the foundation that support our project for we call it our phase 1 project. That support us for the study related to what the impact of the COVID-19 to our energy sector in regions. And the second one is the project about the EV and VRE integrations with the smart microgrid and also in the regions. So we are really thankful to our consultant as well, Dr. Imaduddin Abdullah and the team that already produced several thoughts that, of course, it will be very important and give benefit to the region, and not only for the ASEAN member state, also for a global, hopefully for a globally. We believe that we could learn a lot about this pandemic, especially that we know the crisis is not only about the virus, but the crisis could be on the other form. So we do hope that your study, your research, together with the ACE colleague here, with Ms. Rika, Ms. Sylvie, and all colleagues in ACE, could be give benefit much to humankind. From us, from the ASEAN Centre Energy, we also would like to share our report that already published several days ago, a few days ago, that could be accessed on our website. There are 2 reports there, and also we compile all the activities on all the findings for this study on those reports. Through this program, through this project, we already published several publications. Like 2 international journals. We have the policy brief and also some opinion op-ed for this research. So again, we thank you so much especially for the Energy Foundation China for your support in these projects. On behalf of ACE, we also would like to thank to all participants that coming for today. So we wish your time we will get the fruitful discussions on this event. Thank you so much. Back to you, Mbak Rika.
Thank you very much for the remarks, Dr. Andi. Before we continue our next agenda, we would like to have a group photo first with all speakers. I would like to kindly invite Dr. Yu, Dr. Andi, Mr. Imaduddin, and Mr. Akbar to turn on your camera for a group photo.
I will count in 3, 2, 1, smile. And once more. In 3, 2, 1, smile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvira, and thank you all. You may turn off your camera now. So now we will proceed to the next agenda. As I mentioned before, this webinar is an event to launch our latest report entitled COVID-19 Impact on Energy Sector Development in Southeast Asia. This report provides detailed explanations of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the ASEAN energy sector. It also examines the potential recovery trajectory to meet the energy transition agenda. In addition, this report investigates country by country with an in-depth case studies for Indonesia and Vietnam specifically. Hopefully, this publication could assist ASEAN in achieving a sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, while also realizing its aspirational energy target. The report has been published in ACE website, where you can download it for free through the link shown here in the screen. So now let us hear the findings of this report directly from one of its author, Mr. Imaduddin Abdullah. He has been a researcher at the Institute for Development of Economics and Finance since 2011. He holds 2 master's degrees, Master in Public Policy from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Japan, and a Master in Development Studies from Lund University, Sweden. He is now taking PhD at the Department of International Development in the King's College London. He specializes in the intersection between economic development, the energy sector, and the environment, using both qualitative and quantitative methods. So, Mr. Imaduddin, the time is yours.
Thank you, Marika, for the introduction. Can you hear my voice? Okay.
Yes.
Can I share my slides? Yeah, can you see my slides now?
Yes, I can see.
Sorry. Sorry, I think there's a problem. I cannot see my slides now. Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So I think reset now. Sorry again. Can you see my slides just to make sure?
Not yet.
Not yet. Sorry. Let me start again. How about now?
Yes.
Can you see my slide? Okay. All right. That's good. Thank you again, Barika, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Imaduddin Abdullah, and I am a researcher at the Institute for Development of Economics and Finance, or INDEF. I am the member of the technical expert that were assigned by ASEAN Energy Foundation China to develop or to produce a report on the impact of COVID-19 on energy sector in ASEAN. And today, I think, as already mentioned by Mbak Rika, I will present the main findings of this study. So my presentation for today, I will present my presentation I will divide my presentation into 4 parts. First, I will start with some introductions, and then I will discuss the COVID-19 impact on the energy sector in ASEAN. And then I will discuss the impact of green fiscal stimulus on the economy, energy, and environment. And lastly, on the 4th section, I will end my presentation with some conclusion and also with some policy recommendations. So let me start with the first part of my presentation, that is the introduction. So in this part, I would like to explain the background and also the objective of the study. I think let me start with the background. And I think we already knew that COVID-19 pandemic has a huge impact on many aspects of life and also trigger economic shocks around the world. The pandemic already has impacted many sectors ranging from manufacturing to transportation. And I think it is important to note that these sectors, manufacturing and transportation, are energy intensive. So we already knew that the pandemic will have a negative impact on the energy sector. I think there are a lot of studies about the impact of the pandemic on energy sector around the world, but the impact in ASEAN, I think, have not been closely examined. So our study tried to fill this gap by examining the impact of COVID-19 on the energy sector. And also, I think that's the important part, is also analyzing the trajectory of the recovery in terms of economic recovery and also in terms of energy transition. So this is the main objective of our study. There are 4 outputs of our study. First is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the energy sector in ASEAN. And the second one is the prospects of energy sector development and also the prospect of a green recovery in post-COVID-19 pandemic. The third one is we want to show the role of green fiscal stimulus. And last one, I think that's the important part, is to draw some policy recommendation based on the result of this study. So here's the summary of our study. First, to produce the first and the second output, we use mixed methods where we utilize both quantitative and qualitative data, and also to make the analysis more details. So we complemented the analysis with the 2 country case studies, and then we selected Indonesia and Vietnam as 2 country case studies to understand the situation in more details. We also conducted a computable general equilibrium model, CG model analysis, using global trade analysis project, or GTAP, using a Power database to quantify the potential impact of the green fiscal stimulus. That's the third output of our study. And the last one is, of course, policy recommendation based on the result of our study. So here's the framework that we use in this study. I think you can see on the screen, we include various variables, including health variables, economic variables, and also political variables. I think we incorporate or we include these variables because we would like to understand multiple factors that shape the impact impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the energy sector in ASEAN. And also, I think you can see on the screen that based on this framework, the COVID-19 pandemic will force the government to introduce a containment strategy such as a lockdown or mobility restriction. I think this is intended to reduce virus transmission, but this will result in people's mobility and also reduce the economic activities, not only at the global level, but also at the national level. At the global level, I think there will be a disruption in the transport sector, especially in the global airline industry. I think we already knew with this one, with this effect. And also there is a negative impact of this reduction of the people mobility in tourism, trade, and also in investment. At the national level, of the mobility restriction will affect people's income, which will lower demand for goods and services. And also, I think mobility restriction will also negatively affect the transport sector. And again, because transport sectors and also manufacturing consumes a lot of energy, the economic downturn or economic shock brought by the COVID-19 pandemic will adversely affect the energy sector. And also, I think from this framework, we would like to highlight the importance of the government policy, because we believe that fiscal stimulus not only mitigate the negative impact of COVID-19 pandemic, but also will shape the recovery trajectory after the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think I need to mention that because of the pandemic, because of the sluggish activities in the economic sectors, there will be a reduction in the fiscal capacity that will prevent the governments, not only in ASEAN countries, but all developing countries around the world in terms of fiscal capacity. And also it will limit the government to launch a green fiscal stimulus during the pandemic. So I think that's the framework that we use for this study, not only to guide the data collection, but also to conduct data analysis for this study. So let me turn to the second part, that is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the energy sector in ASEAN. Before I discuss about the impact on the energy sector, I think I need to highlight the COVID pandemic itself, because this is the core of the problem, as already mentioned in the previous slide on the outline on the framework of our study. I think COVID-19 has affected every countries in the world, and I think ASEAN countries is no exception. In fact, Southeast Asia is the first region in the world to report a COVID-19 case, and also the first country related death outside China. However, I think as you can see on the screen, there is a wide variation in the magnitude of the pandemic among ASEAN countries. Some countries recorded a higher case, and some country also in terms of COVID-related deaths. And also, I think, like already mentioned in the framework, the COVID-19 pandemic forced the government around the world to impose lockdowns, and also we can see from this picture that ASEAN countries also imposed the lockdowns. Although, again, there is a wide variation in terms of government response among ASEAN countries. This includes the timing as well as the strictness of the lockdown policy. We try to capture in 3 periods of time. The first one was April 2020, and then the second one is July 2021, and the last one is November 2021. I think because the variation in government response, the impact of the lockdown on people's mobility also varies across ASEAN countries. And to capture this, we use a Google Mobility Index. And you can see on the screen, people mobility has been constantly changed throughout the pandemic. But one important note that at the moment, the situation has not reached the pre-pandemic level. So, and also again, this will have a huge impact on the people's life, including the economic activities in ASEAN countries. In the following section, I will discuss how the COVID pandemics affected economic activities in the region, and also how it affected the energy sector. First, I will start with the impact on the economic sector, and the COVID pandemic affected ASEAN countries through two channels. The first one is a slower economic activities at the domestic level, and the second one is the negative spillover from the global economic recession. But in terms of spillover from the global economic recession will be depend on the several factors, especially the connection between countries with the global economy. So, for example, some countries are more connected to the global economy through the FDI, trade, and tourism. This is, you can see from this table. As a result, the impact from the global level will be also different from one country to another. Although I think there is some variation in terms of the drop of GDP among ASEAN countries, as you can see on the figure on the screen, but I think almost all countries experienced economic contraction in 2020. I think only Brunei, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam that recorded economic growth in 2020, although the pace of the growth was slower compared to the pre-pandemic level. On the sectoral level, we can see that there is a drop in the manufacturing output of ASEAN countries, and this will result the negative impact on the energy sector. Okay, so as I mentioned before, because of the economic recession and the restriction in the people mobility, the demand for energy dropped, with oil and gas experienced the highest drop compared to other type of energy. To capture the impact of the pandemic, we compare the annual growth before the pandemic and during the pandemic. Before the pandemic is the average growth between 2009 and 2019, and also during the pandemic is the growth during the 2020. And we can see from the figure that oil consumption in all ASEAN member states dropped significantly. In some countries, the drop was more than 10%. On the production side, we can also see that the drop in the oil and gas production during the pandemic, and from the focus group discussion that we held last year, and we invited officials from ASEAN member states and also experts, it was revealed that the drop in the production side was driven not only by the lower demand, but also disruption in labor mobility and supply chain. So the pandemic not only negatively affected the demand side, but also affected the supply side or the production side. And I think in contrast to oil and gas, the consumption of coal in some countries were still positive in 2020. I think only Indonesia and Philippines that experienced a drop in the consumption of coal in 2020. But unlike the consumption side, the production of coal in ASEAN member state dropped. I think, as you can see on the screen, the drop was driven by a decision made by the coal companies to reduce their production to cope with the declining coal demands around the world. Now let me turn to the electricity. I think we saw the drop in the electricity consumption in ASEAN countries after consistently grow by more than 6% per year over the past 20 years. Consumption of electricity in ASEAN countries dropped, with the exception of Vietnam, that saw an increase in the electricity consumption. And from the figure B, we can see that there is also a variation in terms of impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on the electricity consumption based on the sector. I think we can see that business and commercial sector were greatly impacted by the lockdown and the travel restriction policy. On the other hand, the electricity demand for the residential consumers increased as people spend more time at home. In terms of renewable energy, I think this is already mentioned by the before that we can see the resilience of the renewable energy is reflected in the contribution of renewable energy sources in the installed capacity of electricity in ASEAN member state. And as you can see from the screen, there was an increase in the installed capacity from renewable energy in 2020. So this table is the growth compared to the previous year. And we can see that some countries even recorded a dramatic increase in the installed capacity from the renewable energy. For example, like Vietnam, the installed capacity from the renewable energy grew more than 120% in 2020. So before I move to the third part of my presentation on the role of green fiscal stimulus, I think I need to remind again the objective of the study. As already mentioned before, the objective of the study is to examine the impact of COVID-19 on the ASEAN energy sector by analyzing trajectory of COVID-19 recovery in terms of economic recovery and energy transition. I think I already mentioned or examined the impact on the energy sector. Now let me move to the recovery trajectory in terms of economic recovery and also the energy transition. I think from the focus group discussion, we identify there are three factors that will affect recovery trajectory. First one is, of course, the mutation and the evolution of the virus. And the second one is the COVID-19 pandemic. And the last one is policy on the fiscal stimulus. And for this study, we focus on the third part or the third factors, that is the fiscal stimulus, because we believe that this factor will shape green recovery in ASEAN countries. I think I already mentioned before that the pandemic has provided unique opportunities for low carbon energy transition. Why? Because the size of the stimulus was big and bigger compared to the previous crisis. And also, if we learn from the previous crisis, we can see that, for example, from the global financial crisis in 2008, the fiscal stimulus, the green fiscal stimulus launched during the crisis have pushed green recovery in some developed countries. So I think, again, the fiscal stimulus during the pandemic will provide opportunity for all countries, not only developed, but also developing countries to push for more green recovery. So I think this is important to analyze fiscal stimulus of ASEAN countries during the pandemic. But unfortunately, if we use a database constructed by the Oxford University, we can see that also from the figure that fiscal measures that are directed for the energy sectors are limited. I think one of the reasons is because of the fiscal constraint, and because of that, many Asian countries focus on the helping the most affected, and also focus on addressing the core of the problem, that is the health issue. That's why I think we can see from here that all the countries provided social assistance to poor and vulnerable households. So I think this is understandable due to the limited fiscal budget that forced ASEAN member states to focus again on those who are most needed. However, I think we need to note that some countries in ASEAN introduce or launch some energy policy energy program, but some of the program were unquantifiable, so it's not possible to include in the previous slide. But I think we need to mention several programs that launched during the COVID pandemic, and we try to collect this information and build policy taxonomy of the policy that are related to the energy sectors launched during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think there are two types. The first one is rescue type, and the second one is the recovery type. And from the rescue type, we can see that there are several policies, for example, subsidy and price discount. And also, I think we can see that there is a liquidity support provided by the government to support firms and also state-owned enterprises in energy sector. And also, I think some of the government introduced exemption and relaxation in the energy sector. And also, I think some of the government also introduced new energy programs, not only to help during the rescue phase, but also during the recovery time. Again, I think it is important to mention the importance of fiscal stimulus. So let me move to the third part of my presentation, where we estimated the potential impact of green fiscal stimulus on the economy, energy, and environment. I think I already mentioned.
Mr. Imaduddin,
Yeah.
hope you could speed up your presentation for another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I think for this, I think I would like to first mention that we try to simulate what will happen if the government provide green fiscal stimulus during the pandemic. To quantify this, we conducted a CG analysis, and we conducted 2 simulations. The first simulation is only COVID pandemic. So there is a drop. You can see on the table, there is a drop in the productivity by 5%. And then also we conducted the second simulations, where we want to see what will be the impact on the economy, energy, and the environment if the government provide the green fiscal stimulus. So on the second simulation, not only the drop in the productivity as that represent the situation during the pandemic, but also if the government provide fiscal stimulus in terms of tax stimulus to the renewable energy by 5%. I think I just skip this one and maybe just focus on the recap. So I think after we conducted the simulation, first we see that similar to the real world scenario, the COVID-19 pandemic in the simulation 1 affected the economy, the energy. But if the government provide the green fiscal stimulus, the negative impact will be moderated. So the reduction in the GDP will be lower in the simulation 2 compared to the simulation 1. Again, simulation 2 is when the government provide the green fiscal stimulus. And also, I think it's important to mention that simulation 2, again, that is the pandemic lockdown and the green fiscal stimulus, not only improve the condition of the economy or moderate the negative impact of the pandemic, but if we see from the environmental impact, we can see that the simulation 2 would lead to more carbon emission reduction compared to the simulation 1. So I think this is kind of what we call is like kill 2 birds in 1 stone. Not only improvement the economy, the green fiscal stimulus will also help countries to reduce more carbon emissions. So I think let me move to the conclusion of and also the policy recommendation. I think I already mentioned or discussed before, COVID-19 pandemic has adversely affected the energy sector, not only in the production side, but also in the demand side. Again, COVID-19 fiscal stimulus, I think, could provide a unique opportunity for low carbon energy transition and also to meet the regional energy target. And as I have shown in the model simulation or from the recap, green fiscal stimulus could potentially lead to double dividends, not only moderating the negative impact of the pandemic on the economy, GDP, and the household income, but also can reduce more carbon emission. I think there is some data of the result, and I can share my presentation after this to all participants. However, if we use if we look on the fiscal stimulus database, some allocation for the green fiscal stimulus is limited. I think because, as I already mentioned, as a member state face fiscal constraints that prevents them from budgeting spending for a green energy transition. I think given the here's the policy recommendation. Given the findings of our study, we propose several policy recommendations. I think there are 2 types of policy options. The first one in terms of the financial resources, and the second one is more on the green allocation. In terms of financial resources, I think some policy can be considered first, like green fiscal consolidation. The second one is mobilize and leverage private participation in the green recovery agenda. And the third one is mobilizing global and regional fundings. In terms of green allocation, I think it's important to ensure that additional financial resources that we got from the first type of the policy recommendation are directed to achieve the energy target. For example, green public investment, green conditionality, and the last one is creating green demand. I think that's all from me, Mbak Rika. Again, thank you your attention. Now I will hand over to Mbak Rika. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Imaduddin, for your presentation. I noted that model simulations conducted in this study confirm the importance of green fiscal spending. So if the authorities allocate fiscal stimulus for renewables, it would moderate the negative impact of the pandemic and also reduce carbon emissions. So to learn more about this, participants are very much invited to download and read the technical report in ACE website. Thank you, Mr. Imaduddin. We will go back to you during Q&A session. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Dong Yu, to present about China's energy investments in post-COVID era. He is a research fellow at the Energy Foundation China. Dr. Dong Yu works on climate diplomacy and supports the president on the strategy and analysis related to international energy and climate affairs, including international climate action, multilateral climate governance, and international stakeholders cooperation and dialogue. Without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Dong Yu.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rika. So, yes, I will share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Yes, thank you. So it's my pleasure to present again. Usually, initially we had a Chinese speaker and an expert in this field to present. I'm sorry that at the last minute he was not able to attend this meeting due to a last minute constraint. So I will try to fill in the space, but I'm not an expert on this, and I'll just present some views from Energy Foundation China on this topic. So apologies in advance if it's not as comprehensive as it could have been. So I'll present some views on China's energy investments in the post-COVID era. So basically, today we have to start from the assessment that economic recovery and energy security are new political points of attention. Maybe giving a less political space for climate change and energy transition. There's also more energy aspects that Dr. Abdullah mentioned earlier, which is in many countries we're seeing a rebound in the coal consumption and CO2 emissions, including here featured China, US, and the EU. And I just want to put that out there to quickly show that it's however, we can still see this rebound is those two parameters will both have a role in Southeast Asia and in China. The first one is a long-term power demand. So for instance, in China, the power demand has been growing. And if we forget the pandemic for a minute, I know it's difficult, but if we look at the difference between 2019 and 2021, there's a long-term increase in the power demand by 15%. However, the situation is different in Western countries, in the EU and the United States, where it's more a rebound due to the COVID after the break in energy consumption due to COVID. And there we see that the power demand is actually quite flat over the 2 years. And so in the United States and in the EU, part of this rebound that we can call it that way in coal consumption and CO2 emissions for the last year is due to this recovery. And also some part of it is due to an increased usage of coal due to high natural gas prices. When we look at what constitutes power, electricity generation in China, it has been on a continuous decline from 63% in 2019 to 2020 and to 60 in 2021. And this is a consistent situation in the rest of the world, at least in the US and in the EU. Coal consumption has increased in China, but this is more due to the increasing power demand than a real shift in the electricity or the energy mix. And whereas in the EU and US, in the US, the coal consumption has been on a reducing trend for long term. And in the EU over the last 2 years, everything is over the last 2 years, there's a slight increase due to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the gas to coal switch. And overall, the result on emissions is that in China, CO2 emissions have been growing, reaching almost the all-time high in China, according to IEA numbers. But still, overall, if we average the impact of the pandemic in the US and the EU, CO2 emissions have been reducing. So this is the global trend. And I just want to say that those two aspects, first, the COVID recovery, the rebound of power consumption, energy consumption, and the long-term growth of the countries, in countries such as China, but also, of course, Southeast Asia, in terms of power demand, energy demand, are what we are facing today. And so what kind of energy investment model should we be looking at and investing in this post-COVID era? And so we find at Energy Foundation China that economic recovery, energy security, and climate litigation are actually highly overlapped and complementary. And the center of the three big circles is huge. There's a lot of overlap, and of course, it's energy transition. For China, for instance, the Chinese economy is mostly divided into three equal parts made of investments, consumption, and trade. In terms of investments, we feel that energy transition could really help bring the Chinese economy into a steady and long-term growth. There is a lot of need for investments in the low-carbon transition, to the point where it could reach almost 1/6 of the total annual national investments. So that would mean, I won't go into the numbers, but a lot for energy transition. It means the digital economy, making 5G towers and the AI and the digital economy overall. It means green urbanization, cities, public transport. It means digitalization and upgrading. That's maybe more for the industrial manufacturing capacities, and also, of course, research and innovation, so that these investments can work for the long term. In terms of green consumption, so consumption is 1/3 of the Chinese economy. Green consumption could really provide a big plus to that. And in China, that means electric vehicles purchase, that means low-carbon living modes, some high efficiency appliances, and these kind of things. Lastly, trade. China, as Southeast Asia, has a lot of its economy oriented towards trade, and the renewable equipments that we both share. We both are strong manufacturers of renewable equipments, but also for China, that means high-speed train or DC voltage, high voltage grids, EVs, or electric transportation, and again, low carbon appliances. So all of this could provide a boost for the economy and get out of the COVID crisis. And what kind of investments, when we look at the energy system in itself, I just want to go a little bit into the detail of that. So we find that China's electricity security needs more flexibility and not necessarily more thermal capacity. So China has enough dispatchable capacity to cover the high peak demand times in the summer. And there's no need for new coal power plants. On the right, what we have here, the histograms are the total power generation capacity. And what we can see is the gray plus the orange plus the blue, which is thermal, nuclear, and hydro, reach almost 1,700 gigawatts. And this is way more than enough to fill all the peak load demand of China's electricity demand. So even in the heat of summer, when everyone is having their AC on, like today in Beijing, there's enough dispatchable capacity. So there's no issue with energy security there. And of course, in summer, we'll have a lot of renewables dumping in. We'll have a lot of solar in China. The summer is also the season where there's a lot of hydro available. However, this is at the national level, but at the regional level, it's sometimes more difficult to dispatch this energy from one side of the country to another, or from one region to another, I guess in Southeast Asia. And therefore, we need more grid interconnection and some market mechanisms to ensure that the power generations are activated when they're needed, and that the power is transported where it is needed. And the new electricity demand in the future, we have to, of course, there will be new and more electricity demand, but it can be met with renewables in a cost-effective manner. And I want to just show very quickly, this is some corner of the table estimates that we made at Energy Foundation in China, but renewable investments can really fulfill a lot of China's growing energy demand and contribute to China's socio-economic development. So when we look at the increased need of electricity, the increased demand of electricity every year, it's around 470 terawatt hours. And we can feel that with solar and wind to match this increasing demand. We need quite a lot. It's a little bit more than double the current rate, but it's absolutely doable. We need a lot of investments, almost 800 billion yuan per year, but those investments will pay for themselves immediately, or almost immediately, very shortly. As you can see, the annual revenues from the electricity sales of those investments are more than a quarter of it. So in 3 to 4 years, it's paid back, and then it's all benefits. And of course, it creates a lot of jobs. We estimate around 5 million new jobs if we develop such a program of massive new renewable deployment. And lastly, but not least, we have to do such a program for renewables really will help develop the more impoverished, the less wealthy provinces in China, with clean power sales. Just selling the clean power in itself, that would represent multiple percentage points of its GDP. Another issue I want to address very quickly is that renewable energy and powers will help reduce China's oil and gas dependency. And I think this is a topic that is on the mind of many countries around the world today with the different crises that we're facing. But basically, the logic is renewable power are more than enough to fuel electric vehicles, And in itself, electric vehicles, electric transportation will reduce the imports in fossil fuel. Due to time constraint, I won't go much into the details of it. You're welcome to look at the slides. But basically, by 2030, if we follow the Chinese government's objectives in terms of renewable deployment and their planification or their perspective in terms of transport electrification, China could reduce 13% of its oil import. And that's 460 million barrels per year and 51 billion dollars of oil imports at the current price. So this is not negligible at all, and this is a lot of benefits for the nation's fiscal revenues and fiscal spendings as well. Very quickly, I want to touch on last aspect, which is international cooperation. And we feel that there's a lot of opportunities for climate cooperation in Asia, but there's conditions for it. From the Chinese point of view, of course, I'm not representing the Chinese government, but what we can see with our partners is that China can bring to the table manufacturing capacities for renewable equipment, for instance. China has almost 300 gigawatts of solar panel capacities of production every year. And that could really help sustain the global demand that is estimated around more than 300 gigawatts by the IRENA roadmap. And of course, that's a lot of economies of scale and cost reduction that we can work on together, not only for solar panels, of course, but also for heat pumps, for cooling, and for a lot of appliances. And also, in the past, China has provided a lot of investment and foreign finance in other developing countries. And we feel that China could continue to do that, especially since that President Xi Jinping committed to stop coal finance overseas. So there's a lot of good opportunities to finance clean energy and the energy transition. There are some conditions for those corporations to be mutually beneficial. From our point of view, we believe that reducing tariffs, maybe managing the IP questions, there's a lot of those, and overall striving to keep climate a topic where cooperation is possible is something that we should work towards. Together we can coordinate on the common standards for low carbon equipment, for instance. And of course, but not least, China and the partner in countries should work together to empower and make sure that local populations benefit from those corporations. In conclusion, so just the 5 words that I mentioned, energy investments in Asia are still needed because there's a growing energy demand and there's the recovery from the crisis. Those investments, they should take place in renewables, energy efficiency and grid, and they will help with the recovery, with energy security, and with jobs. And finally, international cooperation under good conditions can really help trigger these investments. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yu, for sharing on behalf of Chinese experts. Specifically, you stress the necessity of energy investment in Asia for renewables, energy efficiency, and grid infrastructure. Thank you. Now let's move on to our last speaker, Mr. Akbar Dwi Wahyono, to present about the impact of COVID-19 in the ASEAN power sector. He is Technical Officer at Power Fossil Fuel Alternative Energy and Storage at ACE. He was graduated from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia, majoring in geophysics, and master degree at Institute of Technology Bandung, majoring in geothermal engineering. He has expertise in energy policy and geothermal utilization. Please, Mr. Akbar, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rika, for the given floor. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Akbar Dwi Wahyono, as already introduced by Ms. Rika. I'm a technical officer in Power Fossil Fuel Alternative Energy and Storage Department at the ASEAN Centre for Energy. And it was interesting to listen the presentation from the distinguished colleague from Institute for Development of Economic and Finance. And from the Institute of Science and Development, Chinese Academy of Science, talking about the impact of COVID-19 on energy sector and the state of green recovery in the world. And now I would like to run through the third presentation about the impact of COVID-19 to the power sector in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. This is the content of presentation for today. First, we'll take you to quickly reflect on what COVID-19 brought to ASEAN, then briefly through overview of ASEAN power sector landscape, especially during the pandemic era. Then I will walk you through our analysis on COVID-19 impact on power sector, where there was a glimpse of hopes that ASEAN could achieve the green recovery, and what will ASEAN power sector look like after the region as coming out from the COVID-19 pandemic era. Next slide, please. As what World Bank had reported during the first outbreak in the early 2020, COVID-19 was indeed a crisis that required dire attention from the government and also from the policymakers. If we look back to the history of some of the economic recession, the COVID-19 pandemic had already suppressed the global economic crisis in 2009. In 2009, the oil price shock, the global inflation, and the exchange rate crashes during the 1975. And while it was almost comparable to what a Great Depression in early 1930s in terms of the contraction to the GDP per capita growth in the region. And on the energy sector itself, the pandemic also creates uncertainty to where the post-pandemic will set the energy demand to the so-called the new normal, as what the IEA and IMF predicted that the region energy demand will grow around 2% from the pre-pandemic level. Next slide, please. Before we going into deep analysis on what COVID-19 effect on power sector in Southeast Asia, I would like to preview on how ASEAN power sector landscape in 2020, where this is the year where COVID-19 cases was peaking. In 2020, ASEAN member state had total installed capacity of around 255 gigawatt, with Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand accounted for around 2/3 of the total capacity. And the region was still dominated by the fossil fuel power plants, where coal contributed to around 31.5% and gas around 31% from the total ASEAN installed capacity. However, amid the pandemic, the region was successfully registered approximately around 22 gigawatt of new additional capacity in 2020. Next slide, please. And our first analysis on the COVID impact in power sector can be seen as the power demand was plummeting started by the first outbreak in March 2020, which made the utility revenue dropping. Consequently, the stimulus of package were dispersed to help the community who are vulnerable due to the pandemic. And more to follow about the economic assistance to the electricity consumer in ASEAN member state during the COVID-19 pandemic can be found in our website. And by falling electricity demand, this urged the power utilities company to able to cope. This left hanging between a temporary technical adjustment and the necessity to also maybe to revise their power development plan once things are getting back to normal. And then the pandemic had created a ripple of uncertainty to the whole power system. And further down on the line on the government side, the emergency of the policy were also needed to balance between these two pole, where whether to keep the impacted citizen to afford electricity, or whether to supporting the power utilities to be able to survive during the declining of their revenue. Next slide, please. And the second evidence on the COVID impact on power sector can also be seen through the power project were halted due to the mobility restriction in 10 ASEAN member states. This also create a situation where the utilities should reevaluate their master plans and to reorientation their master plan in the power sector, where this is coming as a new way, where the ASEAN power sector leading by renewable energy as the pathway through green recovery. And despite the pandemic, since 2019, the annual renewable energy addition shown in the middle figure, that the annual renewable energy addition has already surpasses the fossil fuel, and by the end of 2020, we see that the renewable energy has already grown significantly. Next slide, please. And in 2020, the RE sector also struggles, but in less severity if we compare to the electricity and oil and gas sector, where the second half of 2020 RE shows quite a resiliency with some major progress across the region, where most of the resiliency of renewable was getting more dominant during the pandemic compared to the fossil fuel. For instance, the case where the second feed-in tariff scheme for solar project were released in Vietnam, which resulting on solar bloom in the country, where almost 9 gigawatt of new installed capacity being added in 2020. The similar topic also can be found in Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia, with their large-scale solar project. As a result, by 2020, the 62% of new installed capacity was coming from renewables, and this is a notable new trend in the Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. And in 2020, the efforts are shown from the ASEAN member states to put renewable energy as a focus for the recovery strategy. This is can be seen as a quite momentum to redirect the ASEAN energy landscape to be more sustainable and to build back better in terms of sustainability. As a result, the region has set 33.5% of renewable installed capacity in 2020, where this only left the region with 1.5% gap to the regional target in 2025. Next slide, please. COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the ASEAN energy sector for the last 2 years and left the sector in great uncertainties, as the mass restrictions were already being lifted in 2022, early 2022, and the economic activities also started to get normal again. The region now entering the post-COVID era, where the question, however, remains on how the power sector look like after post the COVID era. We capture 4 points that will influence the future of ASEAN power sector. The first one is that the ASEAN member state utilities are released the new master power plan, as many projects are being halted. Then they're adjusting their master plan. And in evidently, some countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines have already launched their new power development plan during the pandemic era, where interesting point that where they have more aggressive RE plans in their new master plan. And the ASEAN member state also will have a stronger climate commitment as resulted from the COP26 in Glasgow last year. More countries are now considering the new pathway to net zero emission target. And the third point that could be affecting how the ASEAN power sector look like in 2020 in the post-COVID era is the significant turning point for power sector, where digitalization will be a new era of power sector. This could help to integrate the RE penetration in the grid system. And the influence of international energy agenda could be also significantly affecting the power sector in post-COVID, where the COP26 will affect ASEAN power sector, like the one that like the initiative of one world of one sun on one grid, where using solar power plants and the power interconnection as the main measure to battle the climate change. And also some of the what happened in the Ukraine and Russia as well could influence the what look like in the ASEAN power sectors. Next slide, please. And this is the additional content where ACE will publish the second ASEAN Power update in September this year. And in this report, the ASEAN power sector post-COVID era will be reported and further analyzed. Next slide, please. That would be my last presentation. Thank you very much. I would like to get the floor back to Ms. Rika.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Akbar. I noted that several efforts have been done by the ASEAN member states to implement renewable energy as their recovery strategy. For example, Vietnam, who prioritized RE in its power spending for the next 10 years. Now, I would like to invite all three speakers into the discussion session. For all participants, if you have any questions, intervention, or express your views, you may type it in the chat or Q&A panels. Maybe for Mr. Imaduddin, Dr. Yu, and Mr. Akbar, you can turn on your camera. We will have a short discussion session. For for Mr. Imaduddin first, we have a question from participant here. How does the crisis in Ukraine impact the energy sector in ASEAN? It relates to my question also. Do you think the model of this study could also be applied in other shocks, not just the pandemic? So, Mr. Imaduddin.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Rika, for an introduction again, and also thank you for Rosman Hamza. And I think there are also questions from Ani Yulianti about the concrete policy action that can be developed by ASEAN country. I think because this is also related to the Ukraine crisis to energy security. Can I also ask for all this question, Ms. Rika? Okay. Yes, so also with your question about the model simulation. Okay. So thank you again for all the question. I think I need to restate that I'm afraid that the cut-off of this report was before the Ukraine war. So I think the Ukraine war topic has not been included in the report. So I think the report only focused on the pandemic it's only. But I think the problem with the Ukraine war is kind of similar in terms of the source of the disruption. I already mentioned in my presentation that in the pandemic, the source of the shocks was on two sides. The first one is demand side, and the second one was the production side. But in terms of war, I think it will affect the production side. So I think so. This is kind of similar, but maybe the magnitude will be different. Also, I think the direction of the shock was different in terms of the current situation during the pandemic. The shock in the demand side was kind of more like a reduction of the lower demand for the energy consumption. But now, because of we already moved from the pandemic to post-pandemic, there was an increase in the demand. So I think this kind of create more this disruption in the production side. But I think if we learn from the previous crisis, especially for like oil crisis in 70s, I think war that involving a major energy producer would lead to the price increase. I think it's already reflected in the global market. For example, from the oil price, I think during the between 2020 until March 2022, the increase in the energy price already more than the 70s oil boom. So I think this will create more problem with the countries that rely on the fossil fuel. So I think in terms of the policy recommendation, I think this is in line with the main idea of this report, to increase or to boost investment in the green energy, not only to increase or to improve the energy consumption, efficient in the energy consumption, but also to accelerate energy transition from the fossil fuels to the low carbon energy. And also, I think it would relate to the Mbak Rika's question about the policy simulation. I think this is our objective from the beginning, that this report not only can be applied in terms of pandemic, but also can be applied in other cases, not only pandemic, but also in terms of war and other disaster and so on. And I think the model simulation can be applied because the shocks was the same. That was the reduction in the productivity, and I think increasing the green fiscal stimulus is important not only during the pandemic but also during the war, like today. I think that's my answer, Mbak Rika. I hope I can answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Imaduddin, for your answer. Now I would like to ask Dr. Dong Yu. Your recommendation in your presentation before was about 1/6 of annual total national investment should be given towards low carbon transition. How do you think China could attract this green investment? Maybe it could also be a lesson learned for ASEAN countries. As you know, that one of the challenges in ASEAN for green recovery is the limited fiscal capacity.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good question. I think in many countries, what is happening right now is a lot of borrowing. So the interest rates are rather low right now in many places. And there's also some availability in international finance, whether through climate finance or more globally, other kinds of international finance. In China, I think it's more national fiscal space. They're willing to spend this as a way to restart the economy. But of course, it will have a long-term impact on the debt of the country. However, the benefit from investing in renewables and low carbon economies is that it has a clear benefit. It has direct revenues in terms of power generation, but it also creates jobs and domestic economic growth. And this is a way that the government could get back these revenues and even more on the finance these kind of credits. Now, I'm afraid I don't have more to say. This is our recommendation. It's not what the Chinese government is already applying. It's just a recommendation, but we feel that it really makes sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Now I would like to go to Mr. Akbar. Perhaps you can answer also the question about the Ukraine impact for the ASEAN energy sector. What do you think about that?
I would like to pick up the first question on the Ukraine and Russia war. I think the most impact will be coming from the fuel prices, as the supply chain of the fuel or commodity being disrupted, as Russia has already been a supplier for many years, and this resulting to new opportunity to the country who can be a new player like Indonesia and many others. And this will, as what already happened so far, that oil prices are already risen up again to above the $100 per barrel mark, and the coal prices also risen up again many times now in the Q1 and Q2 of 2022. This also could become the problem to the countries that heavily rely upon the fossil fuels, like Singapore, where they have a many gas power plant, and the Brunei Darussalam as well. However, this will also create chances for the renewable energy investment and financing in ASEAN, as they are looking more like more attractive compared to what fossil fuel had in the table.
All right, thank you. Maybe it continue with my next question to Mr. Akbar. Also, you mentioned in your presentation about 82% of the ASEAN new capacity in 2020 was renewable. Do you think this trend will follow in the next few years?
Yeah, to answer that question, we can reflect to what ASEAN Centre for Energy report on the ASEAN Power Updates, where in that report we analyze the current master plan from 10 ASEAN member states, where master plan we expected that in the next 5 years, around 26 gigawatt of renewable addition will coming into online in 2025. However, there will also be still expected 20 gigawatt of coal will be coming into online in that in the next 5 years as well. But as we see that renewable energy trend already picking up. In my presentation started in 2019, where it surpasses to the fossil fuel addition. I say that the trend will follow in the next few years.
All right, thank you, Mr. Akbar. Maybe my last question during this session to Mr. Imaduddin. The study also has a deep dive case studies into country profiles, especially Indonesia and Vietnam. Maybe could you please elaborate more how the energy situation for each ASEAN country after the pandemic and how they can implement green recovery?
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Rika, for the question. Yeah, I think already mentioned by Mbak Rika that in the report we also focused on the two country case. The first one was Indonesia and the second was Vietnam. I think Indonesia and Vietnam, there is kind of a difference in terms of the impact, because again, as we already mentioned during the presentation, that all the impact on the energy sector was derived from the economic impact. And from the economic impact, because we can see that, for example, Indonesia has the Indonesian economy has fallen into first recession in 20 years, but in Vietnam still managed to have economic growth in 2020. So I think already mentioned again also in the presentation, for example, from the electricity consumption, there is a drop in Indonesia, but Vietnam, they still managed to increase the electricity consumption, although the growth was not as high as before the pandemic. That's the first one from the impact on the energy sector. But in terms of the investment, I think in the energy sector and also in the fiscal capacity is quite similar in both Indonesia and Vietnam. Both of these countries are adversely affected by the pandemic, where the fiscal capacity will reduce during the pandemic. And also, I think this will be challenges in the future, especially I think Indonesia and Vietnam already already outlined the ambition to move from the fossil fuel to renewable energy. I think that will be the problem. And in terms of the policy, I think it's quite similar in both countries. First, I think the most important part is the green fiscal consolidation. Why? Because these two countries are also already mentioned that because of the pandemic, they have a problem with the fiscal capacity. So these two countries already outlined the target to achieve fiscal consolidation. But I think it's important for these two countries to integrate green perspective with the fiscal consolidation effort. That's why during the report we call the importance of a green fiscal consolidation, where the focus was to increase revenue from the sectors to the we move to the more on the green sectors. That's the first one. And second one, I think it is same with the other cases in ASEAN countries. It is important to tie all the fiscal stimulus in the future to the green aspect. As already mentioned in the model simulation, I think it's important. Why? Because it not only moderate the negative impact, but also can reduce carbon emission in the future. I think that's all from me, Marika. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, all panelists, for taking your time and sharing your knowledge in today's webinar. And thank you all participants for joining. We have now come to the end of this event. Apologize that we passed the allocated time 1 hour. So we're looking forward to see all participants again in our next webinar, which is tomorrow, 1 to 2 p.m. Jakarta time, where we will launch another ASEFC joint report. This time is about the potential variable renewable energy penetration in the grid through vehicles in the ASEAN countries. If you are interested in this topic, kindly register through this link, and see you tomorrow. So, all right, wishing you a blessed day. Stay healthy and stay safe. Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.